Welcome to the Economic Rockstar Podcast with your host, Frank Conway, connecting brilliant minds in economics and finance.
Slow down, you crazy child. You're so ambitious for a juvenile, right? So you have to slow down and stop being so aggressive with what you want to do. And we started off talking about too many projects, right? And isn't it maybe better to slow down and think like, what are you doing? And maybe think about quality more than quantity.
This episode of the Economic Rockstar Podcast is a bonus episode, and it's a follow-on from a conversation that I'd had with David Zetland from episode 133. And it's a continuation from that episode 133 where we had a conversation about climate change and water. And we continue on that conversation, but also branch out into gender differences in the economics profession. David co-authored a paper titled Sex Matters, the Impact of Information on Cooperation, and he touches on this paper within this episode. Also discussed are some book recommendations by myself and David, as well as a favourite song of his. This bonus episode was released on the 25th of March to patrons of the Economic Rockstar Podcast on the platform patreon.com. So if you'd like to get early access to any future content, why not become a patron of the podcast? And you can visit patreon.com/Economic Rockstar to find out more. And thanks again to all of you who have continued to listen to the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss any future episode. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of this conversation with David Zetland. Is there any desalinization tablets, or I'm sure for military that they have packs that if they can take water from a river, they can drop in a tablet and kill off whatever bacteria or
you can use chlorine tablets is effective at killing almost everything. It'll kill you if you don't dose it right. But so you can use chlorine tabs. When I was trekking in Nepal, we would get water out of a river, right up the river. Goats would be shitting in the river, but you drop a tablet in there and that would kill those bacteria. Yeah. And that technology exists. It's very cheap. A lot of small scale solutions use chlorine dosages to purify the water. The problem is that water usually is being carried from place to place. It's being put from one container to another. Okay. The people that are using that water may not wash their hands because guess what? You just carried that water for an hour. You're not going to wash your hands also. You're going to drink it. But when they eat with their hands, they might have shit on their hands and then they make themselves sick. Yeah. So the water civilization topic that we were on earlier is literally like bring a tap to that house, let them use as much water as they need to wash and to clean their hands and wash their food, and it's clean water. And then you will have civilization. You won't be sick, which is, I think everything comes from that. And then you'll be able to go to school. You'll be able to go to work. You'll be able to take care of your kids, et cetera. Your kids won't die. That's a major problem. When I started the Dutch paper in 1850, 20% of the kids were dying before they were 1 year old.
Wow.
And that number has dropped from 200 per thousand to 3 per thousand. So that number is true in a lot of poor countries today, 200 per thousand. That's why you have these crazy birth rates in African countries where women will have 6 or 7 children because they keep losing them, right? You can look back in Irish history and find exactly the same thing. Yeah. And if you bring the water, obviously lots of other technology helped the Dutch, but water was part of that. If you bring the water and it's safe and clean, then you don't lose your children. You don't have to have 6 children. Because you only have to have 3, let's say, because you want them, because they'll be alive. So everything starts to get wrapped up in this problem.
Is there any country that stands out there that have the safeguards put in place to combat climate change, or any, I suppose, like a terrorist attack in terms of poisoning or polluting the water? I know the Netherlands is below sea level, or majority of it, I think, and it's building up a lot of barriers in order to prevent potential flooding. And say Switzerland has a lot of fountains around the country and towns and so on, that they can have that access if something happened. They don't their drinking water at home was affected, they can actually access the fountains. I think Taleb wrote an article about that, whereby they're better equipped with their systems that they put in place against if poisoning happened to occur in that particular country, that they're well equipped to deal with that, and the population would be able to respond by accessing that public good, which is the fountains that are available.
Yeah. So if the fountains are running off of a different source, then that would absolutely be an alternative backup supply. Most cities that you go to, the drinking water fountains are on exactly the same pipes as the house water.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have to be sure about that. The terrorism in the water supply, although there are businesses that sell this kind of technology, like real-time sensing equipment, all that stuff, very popular in the U.S. That terrorism threat is, I think, much lower than terrorist threats to other kinds of infrastructure, let's say, because the water supply is massive, and it seems like you could get in there and poison it, and you probably could, but the same amount of effort, the same amount of poison. I mean, I'm not going to be if we're going to do the economic analysis of terrorism, what you're trying to do is get as much terror for as little cost as possible, right? And like what happened in Russia about a decade ago is these terrorists took over a theater full of 400 people and said, we're going to shoot everybody in the theater, blah, 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 blah. And boy, they got a lot of attention, right? And there were children and they had to be rescued and everybody got shot and they got killed. And I mean, it was the whole event was a disaster in multiple dimensions, but it got a lot of attention. If it was the water supply, obviously you could, so imagine you're in Flint, Michigan, and the water supply has been poisoned by not terrorists, but by politicians. And, what are you going to do? Like my kids are going to have brain damage and, I'm going to drink bottled water, et cetera. So people are still hanging out in Flint, Michigan. They haven't fled the city, even though the city is being very poorly managed. So I think that it's just not so effective or attractive compared to other types of terrorism. Obviously, maybe some terrorists has a fetish for water and they could go for that, but it's not so it's not so interesting, let's say, to go after water.
Do you want to talk more about your other paper, or how are you fixed for time?
Oh, fine. I'm good for time.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. You have, again, another paper that you published last year in 2017, exploring group cooperation and the provision of public goods. And you did mention water being public goods, and you actually touched on it in your previous paper, the evolution of Dutch drinking water.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's a novel version of a voluntary contribution mechanism.
What does that mean?
That's exactly what does it mean before you start creating acronyms of VCM or whatever, or a vol.
Yeah. All this jargon. Luckily, that paper was I wrote a 2-page summary for a newsletter for that paper. But that paper was, here's the most interesting thing about that paper is that I did the original data collection in 2007. Okay. So, you talk about a long shelf life of data. So there was a special issue and a call for papers about strategic behavior in the environment. So this paper is the experiments I did, which were on computers in a laboratory with students. In the experiments, the students were in groups. They were in computer anonymous groups, and the voluntary contribution mechanism is another word for a public goods game. So what that meant is that if you're in a group with 3 other people, you don't know who they are, you're in the room, but you don't know who's in your group. What that means is that if you put your game tokens into the public good, then you benefit, but also everybody else benefits. And and other people put in their tokens, then you benefit from those contributions. So it's a voluntary contribution. The trouble is that if you don't put any in, then you benefit from their contributions. So you can free ride on what they're doing. And this is a challenge in any government, any country, any community in the world, is who's going to pay for a public good? And like you do these podcasts, right? If you didn't do it, who would do it, right? Because you're putting in all your time and effort. And if you say, I'm doing this, then people get to enjoy it for free. And if you say, I'm not going to do it, then there's no more podcast from Frank. So public goods have a problem of not being provided at high enough levels compared to where people want them. And the question is, how do we get people to cooperate more so that everybody puts in some tokens? So that's the fundamental question. And the paper was exploring different ways of getting people to cooperate to contribute to these public goods. So the baseline situation was you can free ride or you can cooperate, and you get paid according to how much money you have in your pocket based on the public good distribution, but also what you keep in your pocket, right? So if you're a free rider, you do better all the time. But if everybody else sees that you're free riding, then they start to take down their contributions also, and then everybody's worse off. So what you want everybody to do is to cooperate so that everybody benefits.
Okay.
And that's what happens when you have, imagine you have a sports team. This is a much easier analogy, right? If you have a sports team, a football team, everybody goes to practice, everybody sleeps well, nobody gets drunk before the game, everybody goes to the game, they give it their all, they work as a team, etc. They're much more likely to beat the opposition team compared to no practice, drunk, etc. Right? So if your teammates are free riding and they just show up and they don't do their work, everybody else is like, hey, you're not even being a good player on the team. So this is a kind of a team question. And so once I set up that basic thing, I created a couple different treatments to try and see if I could get more cooperation out of people. And the main finding, which is pretty obvious, especially just since I talked about sports, is that if you make people's payments depend on how well they do, not compared to people in their own team, but compared to people who are not in their team, then you create this kind of we should be a team and beat them dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens is the cooperation in the team, even though there's an incentive to free ride, it rises because you're trying to beat the other teams.
Yeah.
And likewise, or to the contrary, what I said is if all that matters is that you beat people in your team, and it doesn't matter about people who are in the other teams, then everybody starts to hate on each other because they're trying to beat people in their same team. So I was trying to create conditions where people will be less cooperative and more cooperative. And surprise, surprise, when you have them in teams trying to beat the other teams, they cooperate more with each other. And the thing that's interesting is because everybody is in these different teams trying to cooperate, is that all the cooperation goes up, right? Compared to the baseline where there wasn't this team you were trying to beat.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, if you have a sports team, and you're just playing pickup football, then you come out, you play, you might go get drunk, whatever. But as soon as you join a league and everybody's like, we have to beat the other people in the other teams, then people get a lot more serious about practice and being in shape and so on. And I use this, I didn't use this analogy, but I use the analogy of bureaucrats working for different divisions. So you have bureaucrats that are in charge of inspecting restaurants. You have bureaucrats in charge of traffic flow. You have bureaucrats in charge of tax collection, whatever. If you make a competition so that the bureaucrats that do better at tax collection, they get a reward because they did better than the other bureaucrats that are doing, I said taxes, the bureaucrats that are giving out parking tickets, then what happens is the bureaucrats may start to cooperate more with each other because they're just trying to beat the guys in the office across town, right? Because bureaucrats are hard to motivate. If they're in the office at all, they might not pick up the phone. If they're picking up the phone, it's for somebody else in the office. Maybe they don't care. They don't take right? There is a thing. You work in a school, right? You've heard about these issues, right? Like you go to the coffee machine, there's no paper in the coffee machine, right? So whose job is this, right? Yeah. So if you can build more cooperation inside of a unit, then every unit is going to be better off. And as the whole university or the whole city or the whole government will be better off because these bureaucrats are kind of being rewarded for working together better as a team. So that was really the point of that paper.
Yeah. That's an interesting paper. You know, it kind of touches on not Nash equilibrium, but it does touch on the kind of game theory aspect of economics.
Absolutely. You know? Yeah.
David, just a couple of maybe off the track questions. I know I didn't send you anything in advance, and it's just something that I've asked one or two people. It didn't really work out because I didn't send a question to them. I didn't really get a chance to think about it. But I'll put you on the
music
spot.
Question.
Yeah. I'll have to change it now. No, that's the music question. Yeah.
I'm gonna give you an answer. I didn't think about it, but I when you asked this, I'm like, fuck, I better get the music question. Hold on.
I believe you.
I'll get it for you. So I listen to electronic music, which is famous for having no lyrics, but I used to be a big fan of Billy Joel.
Right.
And so I have this, I'm clicking through here to find this title so I get it right. Yeah. Slow Down, You Crazy Child.
You talk to me. You're leaning forward as if you're talking to me.
No, it's like no. That's the title.
I know, but like it's just if anyone saw this video, you're saying it to me, looking at me in the eye, and you're leaning forward, clasping your fingers in between in your hands. Slow down, you crazy child.
Slow down,
and I'm taking that
child.
advice.
You're so ambitious for a juvenile, right? So you have to slow down and stop being so aggressive with what you want to do. And we started off talking about too many projects, right? And isn't it maybe better to slow down and think like, what are you doing? And maybe think about quality more than quantity. And as I started killing my projects, killing my babies, very happy to kill them, by the way, or declare victory. As I started doing that, what I found is that I could write a better email to a student replying to their question, right?
Yeah.
Or I'd write a better blog post because I had time, I had patience.
Exactly.
And if I'm rushing from one thing to another, then I'm doing the minimum and I'm being very productive, but that's maybe not good for me or good for everybody else.
And given the title of that song, what is it? Slow Down, You Crazy Child by Billy Joel, is it?
Yeah.
Earlier on when we had this conversation about taking on some projects, I was going to mention a book, and I'll actually mention it to you now because it's a similar title to Billy Joel's there. And it's one I bought last year and I didn't even get to read it, and there's not much text in it. The things you can see only when you slow down. I think if I pronounce it right, Heyman Sunham. And it's a great book if you're into art as well. There's great illustrations in it too. And it's an international bestseller, over 3 million copies sold. And it's the exact book that I was thinking of at the beginning. I didn't mention it, but just as it ties in with the song, and it kind of brings this conversation in full circle, really, how we began.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Amsterdam. And it's like sometimes I'm in such a hurry that I forget that I'm riding my bike through Amsterdam, which is an amazing city. Yeah. It's like just stop, and look at this, because if you when I go to LA, I fully realize what I'm missing, so it's like it's good sometimes to appreciate what you've got.
Yeah. And do you do anything other than like anything else that takes you away from the work that you do, so that you can, I don't mean meditation, but what is your meditation? Is it cycling?
No, it's I have to go very fast. So no, my meditation is swimming. I swim laps.
Okay.
Nice. And that is great because you get in the pool, and the best thing is I don't count because that's a nightmare. But I just set my watch and I go, and that just lets things. I mean, it is kind of meditation. I can't meditate like a regular Buddhist person, but I just go back and forth, and then things come up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should do that. Or I think about something. I think about a paper or a talk I'm going to give, and it helps me think about, or all the time teaching, how should I teach this next class? Yeah. So that's really a nice way to do that meditation, or that, what do you call it? It's more like things come to you, right? Spontaneously. But the one thing that I started doing a little bit more of recently is woodworking. Oh, wow. And just, I'm a terrible woodworker. I've made so many mistakes, but that's why, free wood on the street is so handy. But I really I'll just sit there and make a box, and it takes like 4 hours, and, who cares where the time went? It's so nice to create something, if you're an academic especially. It's like this, I can put my hands on this thing. So I'm enjoying that as well.
I was only joking at the beginning when I said, are you out chopping wood?
Yeah, this is nicely sawn wood. I don't attack trees. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. Have you read any recent books that you'd like to keep in touch
Shout
with?
Out?
Yeah.
Oh God, I have. So this is also part of catching up, right? I've got 20 books on my pile.
I'm the same. I am the same.
Yeah, but everywhere. I'm working through the pile. This is the key.
I thought I was bad.
Yeah. No, you're. I think. Well, we're normal.
Are we?
I'm writing book reviews because I don't get to finish the book until I write the review. I've got a lot of books that I've been reading recently. The ones that I'm really enjoying that I think you should actually look into, or I recommend to other people, is, what's it called? A cartoon guide to economics, I think.
Is that Bauman, is it?
Sorry,
go on. Is that Joram Bauman?
Yeah, exactly. The Cartoon Introduction to Microeconomics. Yeah. So he's done microeconomics, and non-economic. I read it as an economist. I'm like, this is really good.
Yeah.
And I'm reading the macro book now, and I always hate macro, so I'm actually kind of interested in that.
Yeah.
And then I've done that, and then the ones that I just wrote a review of Future Crimes. It's called, about cybercrime being a problem that's going to grow. It's a very bad book if you're paranoid about passwords, because immediately you'll be super paranoid. But so much crap going on because the internet is without a governance authority, right? There's so many ways that people can steal from you from another country. And the technology people, this is an incentive problem, because they're selling technology and they want it to be connecting quickly. So they spend a lot less time on security. So we have a lot of dangers there. And the book that I'm going to write the next review on, I also read Sapiens recently, which I was not impressed with the last third of the book. So as soon as Harari got up to the Industrial Revolution, I think he starts getting into Buddhism and meditation and, don't use your phone. Things I agree with, but not fitting his narrative. So I wasn't so impressed by that. But the one that I was really impressed by was, and that's one I still have to write the review on, is Jane Jacobs, who's famous for writing The Death and Life of Great American Cities in around 1960 or so. And this is an amazing book. She's the one who's really into, like a Schumpeterian creative destruction, or the way that people find each other in the markets in chaos and there's no governance and control. But she wrote this book, The Economies of Cities, in 1969. I was born in 1969. And this is an amazing book, how she talks about how cities work and she's using economic ideas, but she's not an economist, and I think she was probably ignored by most economists, but it's a really great book. So I'm reading books that are I like reading books that are nearly 50 years old, because there's still a lot of great stuff out there.
I wonder how old she was at that time when she wrote that book. You wouldn't know, no? Because it must have been hard.
Look it up. I think she was probably 40, in her 40s maybe.
Yeah. Because economics has a bad reputation in terms of how women are. Look, I don't know if I'm reading the sensationalist headlines either. How women are underrepresented in the discipline.
Oh yeah.
Whether you go with the sample that the Nobel laureate has, there's only Elinor Ostrom is the only one that's there. But also when I start looking at faculties in different universities, and I do a scroll through of academics who I would go, and I would see, I want to ask this person to, and they're all men, and it's no, I'm not going to ask this person because I want female in and as part of my podcast as well to populate it. And okay, I get some female, and some of them that I reach out to, they decline. Oh, and so do men, but there's more likelihood of a male accepting an invitation to come on. I don't know what the reason is, whether it's to do with the time that they might have in terms of how busy they could be regarding academic work, or the desire not to do it, So I don't know what it is. And again, I fall prey to misrepresenting women on the podcast, because if you just count up, and I know I'm putting myself in the firing line here, but I'm being honest that if you count up the amount of the ratio male to female, there's a lot more men in there, and I do my best to. I'm probably not my best, to be honest, but I do try and get.
Well, you're not the only one involved, so I wouldn't be so hard on yourself. I think that you do what you can, but I think that there is a professional. Let's see, it's a combination of discrimination and I think withdrawal and lack of professional incentives. So, the discrimination side of things is guys voting for guys, or whites voting for whites, or Irish voting for Irish, or whatever. So there's that problem. There's withdrawal because women get criticized far more aggressively than men. And, in some cases, women just don't want to go out in public because they're just going to get flamed, and usually flamed by people that are insecure in themselves, and they attack women as a way of feeling better about themselves, which is terrible, but common. And the other thing is that still women are facing more constraints. It's literally that work-life balance where they have kids or whatever. And man, you've got to be able to do all of that, because I think you saw the statistic that the they were looking at, there was a graph and it showed like salary or something like that. And, salary, and then the child is born. And then the graph for the men just continues on, right?
Yeah.
And when the salary for the women and the child is born, bam, it drops down. And then it continues at a lower level at old trend. So there's a discontinuity for women.
You think they expect to come back up, shoot back up again if it's a matter of part-time? Yeah.
No, the men, the child is born to their family, but they don't absorb any of that cost.
Yeah.
The women get the cost. And, I'm a big fan of intact families and everything, but the women are really hard pressed to do all the work a lot of the work, a majority of the work for raising the kid, as well as being in a career. And by the way, in a career, you've got to be super aggressive, and some women are aggressive and they're usually called, bitches. And when a man's aggressive, he's like, a go-getter, right? Yeah, so there's this really terrible double standard. And men are going to be aggressive and they've got the time and they're judging themselves by their career. So there's a whole bunch of reasons, I think, why women are not going to have these top positions. It's, there's a lot of evidence, and I wrote a paper on gender, which was really a fun paper. Okay. There's a lot of evidence that girls are not just as good as guys, but better at math and writing, and they just are not given the opportunities at the time. The reason that the girls are famous for being better at writing is that they're relatively better. They have a comparative advantage at writing, but on an absolute level, they're often better also at math. What we see in our school is that 2/3 of our students are female, because we have a gender-free admissions process, but we have a problem because for every one guy, we've got 2 girls that are qualified to come into our college, and that's we're worried about that because we're trying to find guys that can do the work, and that's hard.
Like, having said that, when I did come across some faculty in different colleges or liberal arts colleges, or even in European universities and colleges, I do find the ratio has improved a lot more, male to female. So like, even there recently, I spoke to Sarah Smith from the University of Brighton. She's the head of department of the economics school. And, that kind of goes against what I was just saying. And it just proves that, in some cases that there are women who are, I can't believe I'm even having that conversation anyway. It seems just something that
2 guys.
Yeah, that's it's almost insulting, isn't it? Having that conversation.
Well,
I think.
No, I think guys need to talk about it also. They just can't say it's a woman's problem or whatever, or it's not a problem at all. I think we need to talk about it. But one reason why more women in universities in Europe there might be a greater share of women, let's say, at higher positions, is that if like where I am, at 5:00, everybody goes home, right? In U.S. universities, people are working like a lot more, 70, 80 hours a week. And in that paradigm, it's hard to keep up with that pace if you're not if you're a woman, but if you're a woman who has a family, right? Because if women and men don't have families, their wages are awfully similar, their working hours are awfully similar. But if you're going to say, we're going to stop you working at 40 hours, that gives women a relative advantage because the men have to just chill the fuck out after 40 hours. And that helps women also achieve professionally because they can compete easier.
Yeah, one person that I follow on Twitter, Frances Coppola, and she kind of says it as it is. Like, for example, there was a conference that I went to, I spoke at in Edinburgh back at the beginning of the year, and she did say on Twitter that most of the panel are white-haired men, elderly men. And it's true, there was even another conference, I don't think it was economics, but it was a women's conference, but most of the speakers were male. That's ironic. Yeah, it's something about women in education or something like that. I don't know.
It's troubling because, when I teach, it's like, I try and get students to all interact in the class. Yeah. And guys are almost always much more aggressive about putting up their hands or interrupting other people or whatever. Man, it starts at a young age. You just have to stop them from doing that. And it's not easy. And when you stop and you say, okay, female student, what do you think? 9 times out of 10, they say something really useful, but they're just not used to being asked. And so if we're in the classroom as the teachers, if we're guys especially, then, we should be aware of that that structural problem, and try and of course make sure every student participates, because it's obviously not there's a generalization about guys and girls, but some guys are super shy also, and you get them to participate, and then the people who are just talking all the time say just stop, just shut up for a second, right? Because there's motor mouths in the class as well, and so that's classroom management. But when you get into a workplace setting, or you get into a marketplace, or you get into whatever, then there's no one there to help direct traffic, and they need to be able to step up. But they need practice. They need practice of saying what they want to say or what they're thinking. They need practice in dealing with rude people that interrupt them all the time. It's not easy.
David, we've been on this now about an hour and 36 minutes. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or do you want to wrap up now?
No, it'd be good to wrap up. I mean, we can keep talking forever. It's been too long, and there's a lot to talk about. No, I think, the only thing I would wrap up with is that, if you're out there and you've got too many things on your pile of things to do, then start throwing them away and stop adding stuff to your pile, because, life is short, and there's no point in killing yourself for a to-do list.
Yeah, true. Absolutely true. I'll have this to do anyway for Friday, so that's a priority, or Thursday. That's a priority. But,
well, that's all right.
Well, what I'll do
is take a week off and have a weekend, long weekend.
St. Patrick's Day and only had a half a bottle of beer. Imagine.
Oh my God! Yeah, you have to turn in your passport.
I had to.
Yeah. Well, there's another day for drinking.
There always is. I'd probably cut out maybe 30 minutes of this, put it on Patreon for people who want to sign up, and then I release it in about a month's time as a bonus episode. If
Fantastic.
You're good with that. So I'd probably cut the last 30 minutes on your previous paper and our recent conversation. If you're good, you're cool with that, David.
Oh yeah, if you wanted to, I can give you some more material about the gender stuff from that paper if you have a couple minutes.
Yeah. If you want to give her a link in or something on where you can find some of that, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, surely, yeah. So first of all, you've got the easiest way to find my stuff is that KYSQ, right? Yeah. So KYSQ, I've got articles, and then under my academic writing, I've got a paper there called, I'm going to write Sex Matters, the Impact of Information on Cooperation.
Cool.
So it's down the bottom. And that's a working paper that we have never been able to get into a journal.
Yeah.
Because my co-author Marina is not responsible for this, but
Is it Marina Adjade?
What?
Is it Marina Adjade is her co-author?
No, Marina Delagusta.
Okay.
But she's at Reading.
Okay.
And I ran this experiment, and the data. So I ran the experiment, and I got a ridiculous gender effect. And the paper was rejected by the journals because they said you didn't design the experiment around the gender effect. But when I designed the experiment, I had no idea I would get a ridiculous gender effect. Yeah, and essentially they were asking me to go spend $3,000 or $4,000 to go do it again, to control. So sorry about the flawed data, but what we found, and this is, despite their concerns, what we found, so this was another public goods game, right? So what was going on is that people were behind computers, and they were deciding how much to put into the pot, the common pot. And if they were free riding, then they kept the money in their pocket. If they were a cooperator, they put the money in the pot. And this is the key idea: if they're a reciprocator, then what they would do is they would look at what others were doing, and if others were contributing to the common pot, then they would also. And if others were not, they would draw out their money. I started this thing using an experiment from an existing paper, and I thought I would be clever, and I would show, instead of just showing the total that was in the pot, I would show the average contribution by other people in your group. So what that means is if you're in a group of 4 and you can put in 200 tokens, instead of showing that there's 112 tokens in the pot total, and then what do you want to do? Do you want to change your contribution, higher or lower? I said, okay, there's 112 in the pot. You put in 32. That means that there were 80 that were in there for the other 3 people in your group, right? So the average contribution of others, this is terrible math, is roughly 27. Okay, so you put in 32, the others put in 27. Now what do you want to do? Well, you know you're above because you're 32. So some players might lower their contribution, whatever. But what I did is on the screen, I show the average contribution of others, and that led to a really big difference in terms of the gender. So females paid a lot more attention to this average contribution of others than males. And the reason I know this is because I had to run another set of experiments to test that first result against a result that was the same, using the same setup as the paper I was using. So I was comparing one treatment where you could only see the total and another treatment where you could see the total and the average contribution of others. And when you put in that average contribution of others, the females were remarkably more attentive to those contributions. When you took away that information, the females took what you would call like a non-strategic decision. They either decided to be a free rider more often or a cooperator more often. So they didn't look at what other people were doing so much. They just kind of made their own decision.
Isn't that important information to know that that's the response that people make? Especially, say, there's crowdfunding and there's donations being put in place, and you actually see that information. You don't just see the total, you actually see the individual contribution, let alone the
It's
average.
massive.
Yeah.
It's massive. But it was massive in favor, no, it was massive with the females. With the males, the contributions are almost the same no matter which treatment.
Wow.
So that's crazy.
And have you given up putting that out there for publication?
No, I'd love to get it published, but like the journals are like, they don't like the way we constructed the experiment, and they want us to do it all over again. I mean, if you have 10,000 sitting around, I'll run it all over the place, but it's just like, you have this happen with research papers. It's like, I put in all this time. I mean, Marina and I have spent days working on this thing, untold hours, too many hours. And we got it rejected from 3 journals. We're like, we have better things to do. So, but the results was really, I think, important because it fits into this category called women pay attention to their environment. They pay attention to what others are doing more so when there's a cue, when there's a signal, basically, right? We use the word focal point, but that's a no-no. But anyway, there's some common knowledge that other people can see that, whereas the males were not paying so much attention to that. And that's, maybe that fits a stereotype, but females or women tend to be more sensitive to their surroundings. Have you ever been at a big family occasion and like somebody says something and like who picks up on that hint, right? It's not usually the guys. They're busy like barbecuing and drinking beer. So anyway, this is what we got, and I thought that was really fascinating because it's the result we say for implications. If you send the water bill, here's an example. You send the water bill, you're using this much water, your neighbors are using a different amount of water, you should change your behavior. Yeah. But does the guy open the water bill or the gal open the water bill? If it's the guy, then maybe the whole campaign is less effective.
That's what they were doing in Ireland there over the last few years when with water metering. They gave an average and they charged on the average, and then whatever excess above the average you had to pay for it. Now, obviously, there's a stop on that at the moment. I don't know if they've pulled that, so I think that's not happening anymore. But that's the exact experiment. So why not? Why not?
Yeah. So it depends who the person of the gender of the person reading the paper could affect the impact of your intervention. And women and men think differently, they behave differently, they perceive differently, and that's okay because they complement each other in many different ways. And there's this kind of big discussion of, are they the same? They certainly deserve all the same rights, but I'm not going to say that women as a gender are behaving the same as men as a gender on average. There's a lot of variations, and there's some variations that are fundamental, that are, persistent, And that paper was very interesting to me because I've never thought about it in terms of that much. And of course, reading the background where women are better at math and all this stuff, that's like, all this stuff is really fascinating.
What's the name of the paper again?
Sex Matters, the impact of information on cooperation.
The impact of sounds very poetic as well.
Very poetic. You can accept it from when you're the editor of a journal. I'll send it in.
That's it. David, once again, thanks very much for coming on. And as always, you're an economic rock star.
Thanks, Frank, for your time, eh?
Yeah, and no, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. I'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I'll be in touch anyway soon. All the best.
Can't wait.
Yeah,
all right.
Bye. See you later. Love to see you.
Laters.
Bye. Economic Rockstar is a free podcast that does not exclude anyone from listening as long as they have a device to listen, download or stream. I have many listeners from all parts of the world, and I truly am pleased to know that the Economic Rockstar podcast unites all of you through the common theme of economics. I strive to commit to releasing an episode each week and aim to develop Economic Rockstar into much more than just a podcast. Patreon is a platform that gives you, the listener of the Economic Rockstar podcast, the opportunity to express your appreciation of the show by committing a financial reward for as little as $1 a month. Patreon allows me, the creator of the Economic Rockstar podcast, to be rewarded and paid by you so I can continue with the running costs of the show and to reinvest and expand the podcast into other platforms or mediums in the future. To find out more on how you can help the Economic Rockstar podcast and have your name added to the supporters list on my website, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Economic Rockstar or visit the supporters page on the Economic Rockstar website. If you enjoyed this podcast, why not leave some feedback or comments on the show notes page on economicrockstar.com, where you can also sign up and be a member of the Economic Rockstar community. If you're listening to this episode on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, I would love to have some feedback and for you to leave an honest rating and review, as this will help with the rankings of the show so that more people can find it. If you're listening on the website economicrockstar.com, make sure you check out the back catalogue of all previous episodes and interviews with some amazing professors and authors at economicrockstar.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I really appreciate your loyal support. I know how much you love audio, so why not get a free audiobook with Economic Rockstar today? I've teamed up with audiobooks.com to bring you this amazing offer. Visit audiobooks.com/rockstar to download your free audiobook now.